As we prepare, or maybe some of you look forward to the election of 2024, I'm sure we're going to hear that this is the most important election ever in American history. I'm sure also one of the issues that's going to be brought up in this election is the Supreme Court and the appointment of justices to the Supreme Court. The two of them seem to be now a given. It's the most important election, and one of the reasons it's the most important election is the control of the Supreme Court. People are going to die, retire, leave. The president's going to be able to change the court. And so you need to vote for me, whoever me is. That wasn't always the case, either claiming the most important election, but certainly not claiming that what was important was the Supreme Court. It's amazing, even after Brown versus Board of Education, certainly a controversial case. Oh yeah, Brown was controversial in the South, but it didn't become a national political issue, not like abortion did after Roe versus Wade. But now, every election, presidential election, the Supreme Court gets in there. Well, what started it? What started in 1968? I mean, in some ways, 1968 is the beginning of a whole new political era. Richard Nixon makes the court an issue. He, if he's elected, is going to appoint strict constructionists to the Supreme Court. He's doing this in wake of the controversy over the criminal procedure decisions, the decisions that totally revolutionized policing in terms of search and seizure, in terms of right to attorney, right against self-incrimination. Also, he's doing it in reaction to the decision that I mentioned in the last lecture, Abington Township versus Shemp, the case involving Bible reading in the public schools. That is a very controversial issue in 1960, and will continue to be a controversial issue in subsequent elections. Nixon's going to change the court. Nixon's going to change the court. He's going to run a campaign very different. He's going to try to bring about, take that silent majority, what he claims exists, and turn them into a Republican majority. He's going to break up the old New Deal, the coalition that was formed either in 1932 or some would say in 1928, and that has dominated American politics. He's going to break it up. Part of it is the so-called Southern strategy. There's also an outreach to another group that was part of that old Democratic coalition, Catholics. He goes to the Al Smith dinner. Al Smith dinner honoring the first Catholic to be nominated for president. A big fundraiser for the Archdiocese of New York. Nixon goes there, and he makes it clear that if he's elected president of the United States, there's going to be programs, constitutional programs that were going to aid religious schools. Because religious schools in 1968, Catholic religious schools, are having problems. The number of free help, of nuns had plummeted. You need to put more into the sciences because of Sputnik. It's getting out of control. They need help. They're now willing to take help. But they can't seem to get it because there's that wall of separation, Mr. Jefferson's wall. Hugo Black upheld the provision of bus rides in Everson versus Board of Education. He said, we should not strike down a law because it goes to the verge of unconstitutionality. No, it has a secular purpose. But this is as far as we go. Okay, under the Warren Court, you got the loan of books. But again, it was quite clear, this was it, no more. It would violate church-state separation. It would breach that impregnable wall between church and state. When Nixon says, we're going to change things. Another very brilliant politician, Earl Warren, comes to the conclusion in 1968, the Democrats are going to lose. And I don't want, even though I'm a Republican, I don't want my fellow California Republican appointing my successor. And so Earl Warren announces that he intends to retire, that he will retire upon the confirmation of his successor. And then something happens again, which today is quite common, but in 1968 was not common. The nomination by Lyndon Johnson of Associate Justice Abe Fortas to become Chief Justice runs into problems in the Senate. Usually the Senate, in terms of judicial appointments, no problem. No one gets excited. This is basic presidential patronage, if you will, or lower court judgeships are patronage for the US senators from that state that pretty much get to name the person who's going to be appointed to any vacancy in their state. That changes in 1968. Fortas's nomination runs into trouble. Lyndon Johnson, the master of the Senate, thinks he can pull this one off. He nominates Fortas to become Chief Justice and another individual, Homer Thornberry from Texas, to take Fortas's position. It seemed to be a brilliant move. He's going to pull it off. I mean, he can handle the Senate. He's got civil rights legislation through. And this one, even there's a major bone thrown to the Southern senators. This is going to go through. It doesn't. The leadership can't deliver. One person says the whales that dominated the Senate and the House, committee chairman who ruled the Senate, and if you were a first-term senator, your job was to keep quiet, mind your business, follow directions. It doesn't sound like American politics today, does it? But it was up until then. The minnows eat the whales. Individual senators say, hey, this is an issue I can use. I'm going to stop Fortas. I don't care about the deal that Johnson has cut, even if, in some cases, even if I'm a Democrat, but that Johnson had cut a deal with the Republican minority leader, Everett Dirksen. I don't care. I'm going to get this is important for me. This will help me get reelected. This will help me raise money. I'm not going to go along with it. And so Fortas's nomination is withdrawn. And as a result, Nixon, elected, now gets to appoint Warren's successor. And as a result of deaths and the age, Nixon is able in that first term to almost totally remake the Supreme Court. For Chief Justice, he nominates Warren Earl Berger. Berger pretty much campaigned for the job in terms of making clear where he stood on criminal procedure decisions. Harry Blackmun is the next appointee, though not the next nominee, because Nixon sends up two individuals to the Senate who are both voted down, Clement Haynsworth and Harold Carswell, both defeated. Again, this is something that hadn't happened before. They were voted down. Again, today, possibility of Justice Kavanaugh. I mean, he didn't exactly get nominated unanimously. None of them get, even now there's always, before it was, who cares? This is it. Yeah. We have to have a roll call vote. Yeah, there's 100 senators. You can figure it out. 100 is it? No problem. No. That changes. But Nixon continues. He appoints Lewis Powell and William Rehnquist, Harry Blackmun to the first vacancy, then Powell and Rehnquist to the next ones. He's going to change the court. Change the court in terms of religion. Nixon gets these 4 appointments. Usually a president gets, during one term in office, gets at most 2. If you get 2 terms, you usually get maybe 3. Maybe if you're lucky, you get 4. Nixon gets 4 in the first term, almost in the first half of his first term. That's certainly enough to change the court dramatically. And at the state level, now there are programs, very different programs. As I mentioned before, at one point, the Catholic Church didn't want aid. It saw that as a danger. There was no, we can run on. But by the late 60s and 70s, the Catholic schools have problems. They have problems in terms of lack of free employees, the religious nuns who work for nothing. They're increasing costs in terms of science education. They need help. And so 2 states, Rhode Island and Pennsylvania, passed legislation. Since I'm in Pennsylvania, we're talking about the Pennsylvania statute. The Pennsylvania statute would provide supplemental aid to the teachers, for teachers, to improve the salaries. I mean, one of the problems that they're facing is that public school teaching salaries are going up. Now, I know many public school teachers might not agree with this, but they're going up. And so the gap between the salaries paid for teachers in the parochial schools, the Catholic schools, and the public schools is getting larger. How do you recruit? How do you keep the good teachers? And so what Pennsylvania comes up, and Rhode Island, the same thing, is a way of trying to bridge this gap. Because the more we as teachers are paid, the better teachers we are. That's an article of faith, which I totally subscribe to, central to my religion. What do you do? So you're going to try to equalize the salaries. Not if you teach religion, not if you teach Latin or Hebrew or ancient Greek. Those are no-nos. But if you're teaching social studies, you're teaching English, you're teaching French, German, physics, you get the subsidy. It goes, so is that constitutional? It goes to the Supreme Court. As they say, a Supreme Court totally remade by Richard Nixon. It's 4 of his appointees. It should be falling more into the either accommodationist or communitarian quadrants. In other words, those quadrants where the court tends to vote that a law challenged as a violation of the Establishment Clause is not a violation of the Establishment Clause. This has a secular purpose, like Board of Education versus Allen. If you give the textbooks, students to learn need textbooks. It's a secular purpose. They need to get to school safely. Everson versus Board of Education, a secular purpose. Seems to work. And there's another standard that's come up bit by bit, and that is, what is the primary effect of this legislation to advance or inhibit religion? Well, the court found that Bible reading, how it has a secular purpose? Well, they said, it's teaching good values. So that's secular. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not steal, cheat. So, but the primary effect advances religion. That's constitutional. Well, this one, what's the primary effect? Well, the primary effect is to improve teaching. Have better teachers, more motivated teachers. Certainly, that's not advancing religion. It's the teachers who are going to get the money. So it seems to meet these 2 standards. And as I say, it's going to a court which has been changed dramatically by Richard Nixon's 4 appointees. Well, don't bet your last dollar. The Pennsylvania and Rhode Island programs are both declared unconstitutional. And writing the opinion is none other than Warren Earl Berger, the Nixon appointee. And what he comes up with is what's called the Lemon test, the 3-pronged test, to determine what is a violation of the Establishment Clause. In this 1971 decision, Warren writes, every analysis in this area must begin with consideration of the cumulative criteria developed by the court over many years. 3 such tests may be gleaned from our cases. First, the statute must have a secular legislative purpose. Second, its principal or primary effect must be one that neither advances nor inhibits religion. Finally, the statute must not foster an excessive government entanglement with religion. Does this have a secular purpose? Yeah. Passes that one. Does it have a primary effect that advances or inhibits? Well, maybe, but not clear. The problem is that it would foster excessive government entanglement with religion. What do you mean? Well, Berger writes, that teacher teaching history, how is she going to focus on history? What's she going to say when she talks about the Reformation, which certainly you need to cover in terms of history? What is she going to say about Quebec, Ireland, or what have you? We have to, or the math teacher. Is the math teacher subtracting the number of angels that can live on the top of a pin from those who can't, or doing addition, or square roots, but talking about religion? You'd have to monitor that. And to monitor that would result in excessive entanglement between church and state, because you'd be sending public school authorities into those schools to monitor the teachers. No one's saying that they're objecting, the schools are objecting. But for that, it's an excessive entanglement between church and state. And he also talks about divisiveness on religious grounds, that, how much are you going to provide? Well, that's going to be, state legislature is going to have to deal with that, not annually, but every so often, to change the formula. Is that going to result in divisiveness based on religion? But the 3 prongs, secular purpose, primary effect, no excessive entanglement. That's the Lemon test. It would seem, first glance, that Nixon has put the wrong 4 judges on the court. He hasn't got what he wanted. It does also teach subsequent judges, sub-presidents, to be much more careful in terms of vetting their nominees. But there is another school of thought that argues that Warren Earl Berger was playing the long game, that he didn't feel, given current attitudes among his colleagues and maybe among the country, that he could pick up the 5 votes. That he was playing the long game for a different type of program, because this money would have gone to the parochial school. Parochial school would have been given state money from the state of Pennsylvania and the state of Rhode Island to distribute to the teachers. Maybe there's another way of solving the same problem, but not giving the money to the school, to a religious school. And that comes from an effort from New York, from Nelson Rockefeller. Rockefeller is also still looking to become president of the United States. He's, like Nixon, trying to expand that Republican base. And one of the groups that he thinks he can pull into are Catholics. And so New York comes up with a very different program of aid for private schools, for religious schools. And that is one that will provide tax credits to low-income parents if they send their children to a parochial school, and for higher income parents that they can use it as tax deduction. Credits are a lot better than deductions. I mean, that's real money. Deductions lower your rate, but that's not going to be nearly as significant. It seems like a perfect way because, okay, it's again, the purpose is secular, to provide education. Now, these schools are accredited schools that pass muster, they're regulated by the state. The primary effect is not to advance religion. The primary effect is basically to help parents pay for education. That's fine. And no excessive entanglement. Well, there's no entanglement with the school at all. It's the parents who get the money as tax credits. It's the parents who get the tax deduction, which reduces their tax liability for the state of New York. So there's no excessive entanglement. It's perfect. It's wonderful. The case is Committee versus Nyquist. In Committee versus Nyquist, statute is declared unconstitutional. Berger is seen as generally as one of the failures of Supreme Court justice. Supreme Court Chief Justices need to be good leaders, and Berger was not a good leader. He alienated his friend from kindergarten, Harry Blackmun, who was also on the Supreme Court. He had been, I think, whether he was the best man at Blackmun's wedding or Blackmun had been his. Blackmun's mother, when her son was nominated by Nixon, said, "This is not going to help your relationship with your old friend, Warren Berger. Something's going to go wrong." Well, it did. Berger was not a great leader. And in Committee versus Nyquist, the Supreme Court strikes down the New York plan. This is this high wall, impregnable wall. Madison, Jefferson, Memorial Remonstrance, the Bill for Establishing Religious Liberty. All these are in those early pages of Committee versus Nyquist. You know where it's going. As I said, you don't have to go further if you don't want to. Well, that's what happens in terms of the establishment front. The free exercise front under the Berger Court, people were wondering. Sherbet versus Vanna was basically an outlier. It was a dramatic change from previous decisions involving free exercise. So I said, the track record of free exercise claimants prior to Sherbet was pretty bad. They tended to lose, and they lose badly, if you will. Or when they did win, they only prevailed because really it was not just a free exercise claim, it was a free speech claim. The two of them were together. And so there was interest and concern when the case of Wisconsin versus Yoder came before the Supreme Court. Wisconsin versus Yoder involved the Old Order Amish. The Old Order Amish believe, as part of their religion, central to their religion, of staying apart. And that too much education, going too far, will basically corrupt. And so they did not want to follow the Wisconsin mandatory school attendance laws, which require school attendance to age 16. They claim this is going to violate their free exercise of religion. Case goes before the court, and Warren Berger writes the opinion, and he rules in favor of the old order Amish. I mean, how can you rule against the old order Amish? I mean, this is certainly a sympathy. These are sympathetic people. It's interesting, though, if you read the Warren Berger opinion, it does talk about compelling state interest. The standard, which I said was introduced into free exercise in Sherbert versus Vanna by Justice Brennan. But he also talks about balancing. What is the test? Clear, as I say, the compelling state interest is a very stringent test. Most of what government does cannot be justified as having a compelling state interest. It's good, it's rational, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but it's not a compelling state interest. But at the same time that, in the same opinion in which Berger is invoking Sherbert and the compelling state interest, he also talks about balancing. He says, look, okay, these students leave school early, but what's the purpose of education? It's to make people productive citizens. Are the old order Amish productive citizens? Surely they are. So they learn by doing. They work on the farm. They learn skills. If they leave the community, they have skills that are marketable skills, both boys and girls. So there's a sort of balance, what's the goal? Is this way of doing, is the Amish way of doing achieve the same goal? It balances. Now, the balancing test is very different than the compelling state interest test. It's a test that had been used certainly in the 1950s in terms of free speech, to balance the interest in free speech with the interest in government in stopping certain speech. It was used frequently in cases involving the Communist Party. Is that their speech, their books, their actions protected under free speech, free association, or not? Sometimes the court used the clear and present danger test, but sometimes it also used a balancing test. A balancing test says, okay, what's the interest in free speech here, in espousing ideas about the Communist Party? What's the interest that the government has? Well, you understand the marketplace of ideas on one side. But what's the interest of the government? Well, the interest of the government is protecting us from the violent overthrow of our government. Hey, you put this on the balance scheme, there is no doubt the free speech loses. The balancing test, at most, protects a very limited amount of speech, and if used in terms of free exercise, a very limited amount of free exercise. The victory, quote unquote, in Wisconsin versus Yoder is short-lived. Because if you start looking at subsequent decisions involving the free exercise clause during the Berger court, free exercise claimants begin losing. They lose on a fairly regular basis. A lot of them, another case involving the old order Amish is their refusal to pay Social Security, to be involved in Social Security. They see insurance as a violation of the belief that God looks after us. So insurance says you don't believe in God. God will look after. God looks after the birds of the field, the butterflies. God will look after us. And so we don't have insurance. When the old order Amish house burns down or the barn burns down, the neighbors come and rebuild. They don't have an insurance policy. Court says, no, you have to have Social Security. I mean, this is the era when everyone was not covered by Social Security. If you work for a nonprofit, you could get out of Social Security. Now, I once advised that, and I'm glad no one went along with that idea. That was a stupid idea on my part. I certainly admit that in public. But is it a compelling state interest where you had people who were outside it? Public school employees were outside, or a whole group category who weren't covered by Social Security, and the system worked. So is that a compelling state interest? Even worse so was a case involving a young lady known as Little Bird of the Snow. Little Bird of the Snow was an American Indian, Native American. She was required to get a Social Security number, not for Social Security, but basically so that her parents could get welfare payments. The government said, this is necessary to make sure that there aren't 5 little birds of the snow collecting from the same government. Is that a compelling state interest? As I said, for a long period of time, people didn't have Social Security numbers. I mean, right now, a child born, you get Social Security number, very soon. It cut down a great deal on income tax fraud too, but that's another issue. But did you need it for this? Wasn't there another way to prevent fraud? I mean, the issue of fraud came up in Sherbert versus Vanna. People couldn't they defraud the government and say, I don't want to work Saturday because I'm drunk as a skunk on Friday night, but I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. Hey, you prove I've got my papers here. Yeah, oh yeah, right. Couldn't they fraud? Court said, no, sorry. In another case involving an Air Force officer who wore the yarmulke, had no problem. He got into trouble, basically. I think he did something that his commander didn't like, and the court says you don't have a free exercise right to wear a yarmulke. Well, does it interfere with your military ability? I mean, the Israeli army seems to do pretty well. I mean, so again, compelling state interest pretty much got watered down under the Berger court. And it gets watered down entirely in the case of Employment Division versus Smith, which comes up with a very new standard in terms of free exercise of religion. And that is where you have a court, as I say, with the Warren Court. Where do you put it? You put it in that sector's quadrant. Why? Because it generally will strike down laws as violation of the Establishment Clause, but will uphold laws challenged as a violation of the Free Exercise Clause.